proof. We paid for non-toxic paint so I could make the boys a bedroom. Alone on a weekday night, I lugged paint up the row house stairs and got to work. I was in amazing shape from 3 CrossFit workouts a week. I did clean and jerks, burpees, ran endless laps around Philadelphia streets, moving the body, punishing the body. If I was to survive pregnancy, I had to do it in movement. Exercising, painting bedrooms, packing enormous boxes of books and kitchen appliances, these things made me feel like I was still in control of my own body. It was mine. A good friend lived across the street. One day, while sweeping his stoop, his next door neighbor approached him. Do you know that new couple across the street? Yes. Well, I think the man is pregnant. Yes, I think so too. Hot Philadelphia nights. With the windows open, we could hear the neighbors yelling, teenagers riding illegal dirt bikes, the ice cream truck hours after we put Sean in bed. School ended. Then came the long, endlessly long days walking around Fishtown with Sean. We'd stop for cans of seltzer, corner store popsicles. He still took 2 naps a day, and I took them with him, lying in my bed in our scorching room, holding a pacifier in his mouth. Everywhere I went the same. When are you due? September 6th. What? You're so small. But every day I felt stretching, pressure. I stopped trying to wear sports bras tight enough to hide my breasts. The baby grew out, down. He started to eclipse me, and I wanted to get myself back. Wild fetal movement whenever I stood or sat still. I dragged Sean with me to the gym to pass time. He sat in a corner in that red stroller while I pressed, squatted. A workout with 100 dumbbell thrusters, dozens of burpees. The baby inside me was still as I lurched down Montgomery Avenue. After, lying under the pull-up rig in a pool of my own sweat, friends crouching down to make sure I was all right, that we were all right. Dessert runs multiple nights a week. When Anna suggested that Sean's difficulty sleeping might have to do with his 2 lengthy naps a day, I said we should just keep him up late. We walked around the city, sometimes till 10, pushing his stroller, passing time. The new ice cream shop, the new frozen yogurt place. We let Sean lick our cones, laid him down long after our new street was dark. 34 weeks, 35 weeks, nearing the end, a 4th of July party, key lime pies, walking down Cumberland Street to the store for condensed milk for the pies, teenagers leaning against their bicycles shouting, "Look at that, a pregnant man." We took the pies to a party in West Philly. Everyone else drank while Sean and I ate plates and plates of watermelon wedges. There's a photo of me holding him at the party. He's propped up on my hip, almost straddling my belly. Tipsy people came over, offering him more watermelon, making playful faces. Around our friends, mostly queer, nothing was awry. We were Anna and Chris. We all knew each other from college, and everyone had always known that we'd be the first to have kids. We left first, before it even began to get dark, laughing on our way back to the car. Sean's first birthday. I made 2 cream cheese pound cakes, froze 1. We can celebrate when we bring the baby home, I said. I spent afternoons at the very end melted into the couch watching Sean, who could not stand or walk yet, lie on the floor on his belly flipping through books. He could look at books for a straight hour, spend another hour eating a single piece of toast. Overnights while Anna worked, standing in the window pressing Sean against my belly, trying to rock him to sleep. Then back to my bed, where the baby would roll around inside me, awake. A sense of peace those last few weeks. Books about birth emphasize thinking of the contraction as a wave, something that feels most unbearable as it is about to crest.
Thank you for that wonderful reading, Chris. Amazing. And congratulations on just an extraordinary pub day. Glowing NPR review. The New York Times just called it new and noteworthy. Lots of buzz all around. And as you know, since I feel like I've been bugging you about this on Twitter for a while, I've been waiting to read this since I first heard about it. It's an extraordinary book. It absolutely lives up to all the hype and all the promise. And the Times called it a transparenting memoir. And I thought, yeah, that's true. But it's about so many things. Like, it's about parenting, but it's also about being in your body. And I wonder how you would describe it to readers who haven't had the chance to read it yet since it came out today.
Yeah, I think of it as kind of like a scrapbook, more than like a storybook. So it's kind of taking into mind, like, I have a really hard time with the idea of memoir as a linear story, which I think that you also would agree with, right? Where like something's happening in the present story and that's the whole story, right? So I was very much like, yeah, things are happening, like I'm parenting, but also I'm still doing other things. I'm working. Now I'm going to school. I'm in this partnership that needs work. Now my mother-in-law is sick. I have parents and they still exist. And also like, as the present is happening, the past is also happening. So I was very much like trying to just, when considering a present event, what past event would come up when I would think about that present event, and really like, instead of trying to take all of those things and paste them in order, instead to make them all kind of like happen at once for the reader as well. So I really didn't want to use time as the organizing structure of the book. That was like my kind of first rule of the book, was that it doesn't have linear time as its organizing principle.
I love that it's nonlinear. It feels right for a book inherently about non-binary trans parenthood. It shouldn't be linear. How could it possibly be linear? And then I hit this moment on 123 when you say, I look for evidence, and you talk about something you're looking for evidence of, but all of a sudden when I read that, I was like, oh, he's sifting through all this documentation, all this ephemera, all these photographs, all these memories, because there are so many different kinds of research, so many different kinds of primary source documents in the book. I love scrapbook as a term. Do you think of yourself as having been looking for evidence in it? Or what was that sifting through like? What were you scrapbooking towards?
I think I was trying to make sense of like some very everyday, I mean, are they every day? I don't know. They exist in my life every day. Things like your driver's license, or like, you know, you need a letter from your doctor to change your gender marker. And then you like have this thing and it's like, what does it mean? Or a medical record, right? So I was like, I have all these things. I understand what they mean, like what they say, but I don't understand that. Like, I don't understand what they mean in my life. Like I felt like I was just like accumulating things and they all said something different, but none of them were correct, right? It's like, I was talking the other day about how I became really obsessed with footnoting my own birth certificate. And then I was like cutting it in pieces and pasting it. Like that essay took so many different like physical forms, and it was like on posters and it was on papers and it was like in different colors. Like it was just all of the things, because I was like, what does it all mean? Like because I don't have a sense of like, I look at my childhood and I'm like, that's not me. I'm very much like, I don't want to change my birth certificate because I never had the sense that that wasn't me. Like I never was like, I hate my name and I really should have been born a boy. Like I didn't have that sense. So I felt very alienated from like both those documents that no longer describe the person that I'm like living as now, but also like the idea that I should really push away from all that and like turn away from it. So I decided to like turn into it and work with it. And as I was doing that, I felt like it wasn't only bringing up like morose feelings about childhood, which is like obviously part of what it brought up, but also like absurdity, really. Like the idea that these documents like are meaningful took on a new level of absurdity for me when I asked my primary care physician for a letter to change my passport. And it was just like, it's in the book, but it's like, Krys is doing so good on testosterone. Testosterone is just really working, you know, like it's very much like testifying that like, he's a man. And I was like, that's just as silly as like any other kind of thing. Like there's no way to use those to make meaning without like heavy intervention. So that's kind of what I saw the book as, like an intervention in a story of my life that was taking place like outside of my control in a way.
I love that. And in a way, you're making, I feel like, a living assemblage, a living document, because you also highlight for us the things that you don't know at the point at which you're writing and that may change in the future. You leave it open whether you'll have another child. You leave it open what your relationship to your body will be. And it creates this feeling of, yeah, constantly resisting the simplification of the document. And I think the treatment of the birth certificate works particularly well in that, because you're like, here's this word. It looks really simple. It's super not. I wonder what that process of arriving at that form was like. Did you always know it was going to have this scrapbooky form?
I didn't. I also like people who know me in a like close writer relationship also know that this book was one of my first like attempts to write nonfiction ever. I had a parenting blog for a time when my children were like extremely young. So that's still out there if anyone can track that down. But that was very much like weekly snapshot. It was like before Instagram was big, like parents would have like mom blogs. And I was like, I like this as a way to like stay creative and stay in touch with people and to make myself like write things because I can't write fiction right now because my mind doesn't work. So I'll just write like this blog. But then I ended up kind of abandoning my life and going to an MFA program in fiction. And I was like, I'm going to be a really important fiction writer and I'm going to write really long, short stories that say a lot of really important things. But I then started, I took a nonfiction class and I just started writing better things. I was just kind of like, I guess I have things that I need to work out that are from my actual real life. And I can't fiction, when I fiction them, I'm like creating all of these like lenses. That's almost like putting on multiple pairs of sunglasses where like eventually you can't even see what it is anymore. So yeah, I feel like I experienced a new freedom with nonfiction because the most exciting books that I was reading were nonfiction. They just like, they had pictures and they had weird forms and they were just doing things that the fiction that I was exposed to in the past in my life had not been doing. And I was like, I want to do weird things. Like I feel weird feelings and that means I should do weird things. And I also think that while people are very interested in the fact that masculine and trans masculine people have babies, nothing else about my life is interesting. I was like an elementary school teacher, married to a nurse, like in a very middle class, like white life. And it was just like I had like a pretty boring life. And I was like, I think that the form is what's going to have to be the thing. Like the form is going to have to uncover some of because if I didn't escape a cult, like I didn't do anything that like creates a narrative. It was just like, I'm a guy and I've done some things. So how can I like make art out of that?
I didn't know that we had both gone to MFA fiction programs, both taken a memoir class or nonfiction class that then just like changes everything.
Yeah.
But I love that. I remember you tweeting at one point that your son, who obviously one of your sons, Samson, who the book is about, sort of the pregnancy with, said to you, what was they said about coffee? That, you know, if it hadn't been for him, what would you have done? Would you have just written a memoir about how much you love coffee? Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. They're like, I think that they're extremely like grounding because I am just like an extremely like boring dad person who's like living for the weekends when we can eat donuts and play Nintendo. And they're like, yeah, you're right. But that's not really like a central thing for us. So they see me as someone who likes coffee and adult beverages. And that's pretty much it.
Well, I love the dailiness of the dadding that kind of comes through in the memoir. And I just want to remind everyone as we have this conversation to please put questions for Krys in the Q&A because at about 7:40, I'll shift to reading those questions. So it'd be fabulous if you start putting them in, start thinking about what you want to ask Krys. So to pick up on something else about the form that I think is interesting, it's often in second person. At times you address your mother and at times you address your partner. And I'm curious about that choice, why those two people and how that voice emerged.
Yeah, I think I was writing about motherhood. I think that's what I think the book is about. Like if I had to say like when did I decide it was a book, it's like a book that's about like examining motherhood and like looking at it and looking away from it and figuring out like what those two actions like mean for me. So I was ruminating on the mothers in my life and I kept writing about them. I just kept writing all of these essays that were about moms. And I was like, how can you write a book about how you're not a mom when you can't stop writing about moms? That's like a very like weird mental experiment. So that was one reason why I started writing like to them, because I was like, I'm writing about them and it just feels like it's not really going anywhere because I don't know how to define myself like in relationship to an idea, but I know how like Mom, you did this, but I did that. Like that felt more natural to me. And I had a really amazing, like weird MFA experience where there were 5 people who ended up like, finishing in my cohort, and 3 of us were trans. So I had a lot, and that we were not the only like trans people in the program at the time. And it was in like a pretty remote place. So it was like a very like niche artistic community. And I like experienced firsthand like how it felt to write to someone, when you're like, well, I know Alex is in the room, so like I know someone's gonna get this. And I started thinking about like, what about people who really don't get it? And for me, that's like cis people. They don't quite get it, but they want to get it, right? Like there are a lot of things about me that like my mom loves and understands because she raised me, and like we FaceTime 3 times a week and like talk about we just chat. But there are like fundamental things that she'll never understand about me, right? Like no matter how many books I write about it, that's just not going to happen. And I also like am in a very long, for how old I am, partnership with a person who is cis and very, very connected to like her identity as a woman. And I started writing to her because I was kind of like, it's a way not to explain like basic facts of my life and like what is being trans. Like it cuts away a lot of the like educating that I didn't want to have. But there's still a lot to explain. And I think that sometimes we have a different take on, a time of our life or things that happen. And I was like, this is a way to like create intimacy without ever like turning it into like a trans memoir that's about what does it mean to be trans. Cause that's not a genre that it's a genre that I read very deeply in and enjoy and think is like amazing work that allowed me to do the work that I want to do, which has nothing to do with explaining what it means to be trans.
I love that. And the use of pictures to me in some way seems to sort of interplay with that, where at some point you say that readers always want to see what you look like now. And you actually don't give that to us, with the exception, of course, of the author photo, which then sort of intersects with the text and interacts with the text in really interesting ways. But the book is full of photographs of you pregnant with Samson, of you parenting, that kind of creates this interesting interplay with the way you're describing yourself, and then we also see you from the outside and form our own image in a way that sort of reminded me of just embodiment as a trans person, where you have your knowledge of who you are and then you are constantly being read or misread by other people. I wonder how you thought about that in terms of the photographs, and how you thought about the representation of you, Krys, as character.
I never had any doubt that I would include childhood or baby photos of me. Those went in very early, and they stayed in as a concept and a tool through all of the weird things that I ended up doing and doing away with while writing. I was always like, baby pictures and pictures of me as a young child, they're in here somehow. I changed out which was which. Like there were some that were in and then now they're out, and others that I dug up and put in. Like there's a lot of thought to what exact images, but I really struggled with whether to put adult pictures in, and if I did, like what they would mean and what they would be for. I think like, right now there's a huge public spotlight on transmasculine people who carry children, but it's not a new concept or a new thing. Trans people have always been doing all the things that cis people are doing. So like when I had Samson, I had been in support groups for transmasculine parents online that were like very small at the time, like for some time. Like as soon as I started, thinking about this and then trying to get pregnant, like I was in these groups meeting people who had like kids already, right? So this is like a very like, it was a very dialed in community, and there was always discussion that was extremely like rigorous and robust about what does it mean to go public with your story. Like what if someone from a news outlet contacts you and your picture or videos of you are in there, like how is it going to be? Is it going to be like humanizing or dehumanizing? And like people would talk about like this journalist does this and this journalist does that. Like there was a very really like amazing discussion happening for some of the like very brave people who have like been, you know, not like I'm going to write an artsy memoir about it and there's going to be some pictures of me buried in, but who are like, yes, CNN is going to come to my house and then I'm going to like do a story. So I think I was thinking a lot about them and pictures of them. And one of the things that I tried to work through a little bit in the book and I'm working through as a human is the fact that I did it before transition. Like, I think that there is a big divide, like it's like a subculture, right? It's like trans people, transmasculine people who have babies, right? And then like there's a divide within that community. There's people who did it before and people who did it after. And I have a slight feeling about like the order that I did things in my life that I think every adult is lying if they say that they don't worry about the order that they did things in their own life. And I don't feel because it gives me like street cred. I feel more because I was very disembodied while doing this thing. And I don't like that for myself. I wish that I could go back and feel more embodied. So I think including pictures to the long answer to your short question was,
long answer.
yeah, like including pictures was in some way like a reclamation of myself because I see in no matter what picture I'm looking at, I now see myself. Like I feel like I've done work on myself to like the way that I am like in my embodiment. And when I look at those pictures, I don't see how I felt then. I see myself now going through an experience that brought me here. So I was kind of like, I don't care that people will say like, well, he wasn't really trans yet, or like, he doesn't look, you know, like, I wasn't invested in that anymore. I was just like, it works for me. Like, it's really like doing the thing that I want photos to do in the text for me. And that's the most important thing at the end of the day.
I love that. And it's making me think about a research detail in the book that I'm now utterly obsessed with, which is the idea that ultrasounds are not actually pictures, that they're just like approximations of the shape. And maybe there's something in there about like transness and the photographs and whatnot. Maybe this connects to one of my favorite quotes in the book, where you're writing about your son Samson and you say, "His freedom is something I never could have imagined, and it is terrifying to me." I wonder if you could talk to us about that line.
Yeah, I think I've like, speaking of my personal growth during and after writing the book, when I write in the book about how when I was pregnant, I found out that like I was going to have an assigned male at birth child. And I felt a lot of like shame about that. And then I had, of course, like the mental spiral about like writing about transness and shame. Does it mean that I'm saying I'm ashamed of, like, I'm ashamed of a lot of things I've done? That doesn't mean I'm ashamed of who I am. So whatever, I've come out on the other side of that, but I wrote about like how I found that out and then felt like I'd done something wrong, like in a global sense, like what would the world think if they knew this about me, that I was the type of person who would find out whether I'm having a boy or a girl. And I had a very difficult time grappling with the fact that I thought that being a boy was easier because you have more power and people let you kind of walk all over people. Like I had this idea of like masculinity and growing up as a boy that was very like mired in negativity and was about like, now he'll get to do not only will he get to have the childhood that I feel in some ways I should have had but didn't get to have, but also he will like get to have an easy life because he's a boy, which makes like no real sense, like because our feelings like don't have logical sense to them. And it's okay to say like some of the feelings that I have are not real, they're not grounded in reality or sensical, or they don't describe the right, like he identifies as cis, but that doesn't mean he's gonna have an easy life. He's like a full human, you know, even though he's a white guy, he's still like a full human. So I had to do that, but also I feel he's just growing up in a time and family that was like an unimaginable family structure to me. I didn't know queer people growing up. Like I didn't know that people were queer that I knew growing up at all. I can't even remember like an Alison Bechdel seeing a butch moment for myself until like college, like they were like, if you're a lesbian in high school, we all hate you because it's a all girls high school. And then going to college, I was like, now I know people who are queer and it's like fine. And I guess I'm one of them. but yeah, he's just growing up with so much like talking about gender and talking about possibility. And he's like, I'm not into that. I'm cis. I'm gonna go outside and play now. But like the avenues available are like both exciting, but also like terrifying. Cause I'm like, would my whole life have been different if I had had like this avenue available to me? So I guess it's kind of like an old head looking back on like what would have been different if I was born in a different time, which is not useful, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to like ruminate on it in art.
It may not be useful, but it sure is relatable. And I think part of what makes this book so powerful is your willingness to write about shame, or your willingness to write about conflicted feelings, your willingness to be open with the reader about that. And one of the things you do this so well with is anger, which you write quite a bit about in the middle of the book. I wonder what it was like to write those sections and to sort of hold your anger out for the reader.
Well, first of all, it's easy to want to combat the idea that like testosterone is what makes people aggressive, like, which I think is still weirdly like a prevalent idea. And that if people go on testosterone, they'll be like all ragey or something. Like, I feel like people said that to people, well-meaning cis friends would be like, aren't you going to be so angry? I'm like, I am angry. You just don't know that about me. Like, I am angry. Like, I was a very angry person. But it's easy to not know that if you don't see it. And I felt like it was dishonest to, I don't think that the memoir, I mean, people who are in a memoir have their own, they have to reckon with what is said about them or what images they're in or whatever. But I don't think that I wrote the memoir to either tell anyone else's story or write someone's biography or to point a finger at anyone for anything. That's not really like the point of it. But I was like, if I'm going to turn a hard lens on some of the things that I wish had been different, I should also turn a hard lens on the things that my kids are going to wish was different, which is like that I don't lose my temper and I don't yell at them, and that's not part of like a lifetime of like pretty intense repression that led to some like issues in my young adult life. And like kids see the way that their parents resolve conflicts and how different people deal with anger, and teaching like dealing with anger and upset feelings as part of parenting. And I was like, I can't like pretend that I've always been this like almost jolly and sedate person that most people who know me know. Like, I'm glad that I have that now, and that I'm like pretty chill in my adult life, but I feel it's dishonest not to own up to the fact that I haven't always been that way.
I love that. I'm going to ask one more question before we take it to viewers' questions. What do you want readers to take away from the book? What would you kind of send them off into the world with?
So I have been extremely lucky in my parenting journey here in Philadelphia to have a lot of like mom friends. I don't think that the people who I'm really close with who have children, who are like my neighbors and friends, and people I met in a breastfeeding group, which I've written about too, like I made a lot of like intimate friends through mom things. And I don't think that any of those people like thought I shouldn't be a part of like this conversation that we were in. And I never felt like an interloper, or like that was kind of, it was like a group of people who just had babies and we're all breastfeeding together, or like a group of people who are like at the playground with our kids, but like everyone except me is a mom, but that's okay because we can all hang out. So I feel like there's this like very robust conversation about like parenting and what it means that's happening. A lot of it in literature and also in the world and in blogs and on Instagram, like it happens everywhere. But in literature specifically, I love writing about motherhood and motherhood memoirs and like that, and novels about early motherhood. Like those are so central to my life as a reader, and not in a like I read things because I want to be chatted. Like I just love to take that stuff in. That's like a juice box for me. And I wanted to be a part of that conversation, but also I think that conversation, as many critics have pointed out way better than me, it's extremely white middle-class lady talk. And I'm like, well, there are aspects in which like I very much fit into that demographic, but I feel like there are amazing Black and people of color writers and poor writers and single parents and disabled parents who are like starting to kind of push on that conversation. And I was like, I can also come in. Like I can approach that like conversation about parenting with love because and acceptance, because I do love and accept like the white middle class ladies who are my mom friends, but I also like to push on them a little bit. So I think that the ultimate thing that I would like people to take away is this idea that like when we talk about parenting, like it's impossible to really separate people into neat categories. And like we're growing up in a world where all kinds of people are doing it or thinking about doing it or turning away from it. Like whatever people's relationship is to parenting, there's gonna be so many other lenses. So I just want people to like really the book doesn't have like a message. It's very much just like immerse yourself in this like experience and then think about like what it means to allow new and different people into this conversation.
I love that. And I love that the metaphor you went to, the juice box, like the people in the chat, I love the juice box metaphor as the place to go, the parenting one. All right, so turning to some of the questions in the chat, let's go with Anna's first because it connects to what we've just been talking about. Anna asks, I'm actually really interested in the idea of dailiness and mundanity and how it works in memoir. So can you talk a little bit about whether you resist or have to resist making the daily more exciting? Do you intentionally try to heighten the daily via that formal experimentation? What's your relationship to mundanity in the memoir?
I have a mundane life. So if I'm gonna write nonfiction, it's either gonna be researched or it's gonna be about mundane things or both, right? Like, so I'm always, and I love like writing that's about dailiness. Like I love to read like published diaries. I don't want to write like so diaristically, but that's like something that I enjoy reading. The way that I deal with it is formal choices. A lot of the book is like prompts that I gave myself, like use 12 words that first appeared in print in 1987, and each one's going to be a flash essay, and like that's the assignment that I gave myself, like that I totally just randomly made up because I wanted to like write about my birth certificate, whatever. So a lot of the stuff that takes place in that essay is so random and also very daily. So I think that like formal choices, I also am a flash writer. I mostly publish works under 1,000 words. I have some of the sections of the book were published as longer essays, but the ones that were published in longer form are basically compilations of flash bits. There's an essay in the book that's about breasts that is like the most sustained, I won't say sustained effort, because like I do put effort into all writing, but it's the most sustained examination of something, but it's extremely fragmented. So in a flash, I think that one of the things that flash can do that a longer piece can't do as well is really talk about moments that we see as very small and connect them to other things. So if you actually look at some of the flashes that seem to be about something small, there's always like, I think of them as like intruders, like in the daily moment where it's like research or things from the past or like a nugget about like some other bigger idea. And there it's kind of like it's the small moment, but there's all these like intruders competing for your attention. So I think that that's like how I approach it through formal choices and also through like keeping segments short and allowing other things to like converse with, like I'm walking down the street with a stroller, but also I'm thinking about X, Y, and Z thing.
That's awesome. Let's go to another question. Do you think that there's a way to articulate what it means to be a queer parent that's separate from an individual's specific gender and or sexual identity?
I mean, I do think that something that is in the book, it's not like, I don't know if you can even say that there are central things. There's so many things, but the experience of marginalization as a parent is not something that is specific to queer parents at all, but it is, I think, something that unites queer parents, that they experience feelings of marginalization, whether it's from like their parenting community or you know, a lot of people in my life have said damaging things about like what it means for my kids to grow up in the family that they're growing up in. And I think that that does shape your parenting. Like Anna and I talk a lot about how our family unit to us feels very like insular. It's very much like a hyper protected bubble where we're like, we are all very tight. And in a way, I think that's because we were like overprotecting from like some of the negativity like that's come from the outside. And other queer families that I know, it's very much like a huge connected like queer people structure. And I think that like that's what I would say. It's more about like relating to the outside world than like the daily, in my opinion, the daily practices of parenting with very young children, which is like the time that this book covers. The book ends when my middle child of 3 is 5, and he's now almost 8. So it covers this, like, I'm parenting small children, and it's like wiping butts, I'm up too early, like that stuff is the same for everybody, but it's like how you conceive of like what it means to take your children out in public, and maybe people are going to say something or they're going to be confused about who you all are to each other. People in my neighborhood used to think I was just like a really great nanny because I looked young, or did at the time. And someone even approached my partner to say that they were jealous of how great her nanny was, and she was like, that's but thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let's go to Austin's question in the chat. Can you talk about the process of expanding your imagined reader to include cis people? Because part of what you're just mentioning is like navigating that difference in what people understand. So besides making use of the epistolary form and writing to mothers who are cis, what other craft choices went into that expansion?
It's interesting. I think that at first I would have said that cis people don't necessarily go through some of the individual problems that I have had with like trying to explain who I am to my children and how I'm related to them. And like, either I feel like I have to over explain and then I feel deeply uncomfortable, or I feel like people just assume that like we're just a cis family. And I mean, this is like not common in Philadelphia because I think I'm read as like a trans masculine person here. But when we lived in the Midwest, it was just like, we're a straight cis family, and we everybody knows how our kids were made, and that's it. Like there was it was always like shocking to people a little bit when we would be like, actually we're queer and here's like our family structure. That's a lot more than you wanted to know, but we're telling you anyway because we can't actually be close friends with you unless we like gauge your reaction to that. So in a way, it's like trans people already know this stuff. I think that for some trans people, it's either like, wow, I'm a trans parent, and a lot of what you're saying like is it's very much in the wheelhouse of what I think about being a trans parent, and there's just not a lot of literature about it. So like there's like trans people who are parents are like, I'm really vibing with some of the things that you're saying. And then there's like trans people who are like, do I want to do this? Do I want to have a family, whether it's like through you know, pregnancy and birth for the trans person or not. It's like, wow, you're thinking through a lot of things, and I'm seeing like the evolution of your thoughts. Like there's more of like a process thing. And then for cis people, it's like, man, like there's a lot of just weird, small, like micro aggressive type of stuff that sounds very tiring, and like it costs a lot of money to go to court to adopt your own kids. And like cis people don't know that. Like they don't know that it's just annoying. And like doctors say the most outlandish things. It's always pediatricians who like really mess up. And I'm like, are you like, you know, I don't have problems with doctors necessarily saying bad things to me. It's always like, oh God, I'm bringing my child for medical care. What are they going to say this time? I think cis people just don't know that that happens. Like, I think they think that like trans people are very brave, and it takes a lot to transition. And once you do that, you've done the brave thing. And like, now Krys is fine. Like I have a nice job and I live in a nice house. So like everything must be fine, but it is just like this, I'm always coming out to people and I don't know how it's going to go. And it's just like, you know, like I think cis people just don't know that. So it's like kind of beating them over the head in the book a little bit.
Thank you. For that, I just have to say thank you. Thank you for doing some educating of cis readers about that. Let's go to Stephen's question in the chat. How did you navigate the intersection of where your stories meet the stories of real people in your life, especially as is the case for almost everyone in the book, the ones you still have relationships with. How did they respond to your version of these stories going into print?
We'll find out not today. I mean, so like Anna has read the book. She's the most like central person other than me in the book. She is in the book a lot more than any of my children. It's a book about parenting, but it's more like my thoughts on me as a parent, which makes it sound really boring. But like the kids aren't really there as people. They're almost like I think of them as like props almost. Like they're there, but you don't really like meet them and get to know them. I think towards the end of the book, I allowed myself to like show Samson as more of a person. My other two kids like might as well just literally be like cardboard cutouts of humans in scenes. They're not doing anything. They're not saying anything. So they know that the book exists and they're like pissed that they're not in it. You know, they're like, well, why is it about Samson? Where am I? And I'm like, this isn't, not everything's about you. We talk about this all the time in our family. Not everyone gets the same things, whatever. Samson is a very private person, but I think has done well. I talked to him while writing, but he was like in preschool, so that's not useful. You cannot obtain a preschooler's consent to write about them, it turns out. And now he's like, he knows about it and he's like, okay with it. He's seen the pictures. They're all baby pictures. There's nothing that really looks the way he looks now. He knows that like people will know his name and he's okay with that. My parents, I don't know. They are in the book. They take up a small number of page numbers, but I think thematically they are not small. They're in fact quite large. So we'll see. I'm not the only artist in my family. I am one of 6 kids. I have 2 brothers who are filmmakers. They have made an autobiographical film that I think made my parents unhappy, but we never talked about it because that's how we do things. So hopefully that will be the outcome. I bet my parents are here too. I didn't even look, but I bet they're here. So hi, mom and dad. My siblings aren't really in the book. So yeah, like there aren't, and my mother-in-law, I think of her as the person I wish could read the book. If I had to, like, I told my parents I would prefer if they didn't read it, which is just fueling them, I know. I was like, should I just not say anything and hope that they like lose interest, or should I like say something? So I did say, I do not want you to read it, but I'm sure they're gonna read it. But I wish my mother-in-law could read it because she is in the book. And I think, I wish a lot of things about her life and our relationship. And I can't make any of that happen because she died of a very aggressive cancer a couple of years ago.
I'm sorry. I loved what you said about the family not really talking about things. I feel like that's simultaneously how one ends up with memoirs, but then also what smooths the publication path of the memoir. Is just not talking about it.
Yeah, what I see memoir writers talking about, like I had everyone vetted and like I'm kind of like, there's nothing in it to vet because it's not actually like it's more about like it's about me. It's like very much a memoir. Like it's always like how I interpreted it or like what like it's never like my parents did all this bad stuff and that's why I didn't end up bad. So I don't know what that even means, but it's not about them. It's very like self-aware and almost like a crippling way.
And wonderful to read. I had prepped a question about your Newfoundland in case we were running out of questions, but we are not running out of questions. So I'm not going to get to ask you about the Newfoundland that I saw on the Slack of a writing thing that you and I were both in. So we're going to go instead to Jordan. I hope I'm saying your name right, Jordan, who asks, I wonder if you could speak to your anxieties about releasing a memoir and how you and they also say congratulations. So let me say that first. I wondered if you could speak to your anxieties about releasing a memoir and how you manage that before publication, and perhaps now that it's in the world, gorgeously complete, publicly accessible.
It's been up and down. I think I had the amazing blessing of while I was like working on like what's going to be in this last section of the book that I know I need to write, and I have notes and ideas. Like I was sitting down to write it, and I got to interview Carmen Maria Machado right before her memoir came out. And I just remember very much like she's a writer that I very much admired from her fiction and was so excited to get the memoir, but I had only read like whatever was, you know, like she read at a reading, and I like knew what was coming. Like I read some of her nonfiction and I was just like, this is going to be so good. But she was just like, it's just a lot. I'm never doing it again. You know, like I think that like, and the memoir is fucking amazing. But I think just seeing even like, you know, she said amazingly intelligent things about all like our formal interview questions, but it was very much like, it's a lot. And I was like, that coming from someone that I admire so much as a writer, like that, I just held on to that as like a nugget. Like it might be hard. I didn't think it was going to be, but I was like, it might be hard. So someone else gave me permission to feel this. So I'm going to allow myself to feel it. It's been really helpful. I think some of my day job colleagues are here. I started a very interesting day job like 2 or 3 months before I sold the book. We moved back to Philadelphia and I was like, I need to do something. I can get an artistic job of some kind. I can try to cobble together part-time things because I'm married to like a workaholic who was like, I'll work 30 jobs so you can like write things. And I was like, no. So I took a full-time job in a pediatric oncology clinic doing stuff that has nothing to do with creative work. Although I am now asked to like write content pretty regularly. It's not a writing job. And having that as like something to learn about and think about that's not about me, not only has really helped with my like pre-publication anxiety, it's also been like a true gift in editing a book that's so personal and it's so much about me and it's so circular. And it's like, I keep coming back to my childhood and I keep coming back to my relationship with my mom. And like, I'm so tired of myself, but that wasn't like my whole life. Like I had this whole other life and it felt like I can escape that and go to work, and then I can escape work and like be back in this like piece of art that's about me. So it ended up like timing wise working out like super, super well. So yeah, I recommend getting a job in a medical clinic, serving patients with illnesses you know nothing about at all, and then that will help you publish your memoir.
I think that is very strong advice. We're going to go to one last question. While writing, did you go back and forth on how much vulnerability, which is something I think you're just gesturing now to sort of the way that's difficult, you wanted to expose? Or did you always know from the very beginning, even before starting, that vulnerability was always going to be a factor in order for the book to be your complete truth?
I think this is going to sound very odd to people who have read the book or are reading it. I never thought that it was as vulnerable as it is while I was writing it. I think until I read the audiobook, I thought so much about form while I was writing it. And I thought so much about how it looked. Like I was obsessed with aesthetics and I didn't write it in Microsoft Word. I like stupidly learned to use InDesign, and like, I just like made it all about like what's happening on individual pages and what visual experience is the reader having and what order is it in, and like, how is the reader going to feel when they turn the page and on one page, like my mom's folding laundry and on the next page, it's a picture of me, you know, like I was so immersed in how am I going to make the fact that I've decided against linear time, like how am I going to make it work and how am I going to put all these different things together to speak to each other, that I didn't realize that when you put it all together, it's like, wow, there's like a lot in there. So I feel like very grateful to myself for like encouraging all of this formal play and not just having it because I don't think I ever would have said all the things that I ended up being able to say if I wasn't like also like reading research and thinking about what it meant in my life and reading other writers and thinking about like what, you know, like the invention of ultrasound machines and like all of this random stuff. I was just kind of like, I'm playing and it feels like play, so it must be playful. And then I read it and I was like, it's not playful. It, you know.
Or it's also playful. It's also playful.
Formally, it's very playful. And I make light of a lot of the like humorous parenting things, but I just didn't realize it. And I think that that's one of the amazing things to me about nonfiction, is that I have met so many amazing nonfiction writers who just have exposed me to so much writing that is so formally playful that I've just kind of jumped into that like wheelhouse, and it has been like literally life-changing for my writing.
Absolutely love that. Well, congratulations, Krys, and thanks for having this conversation.
Gosh.
Everybody buy the book.
Yes.
It's wonderful.
It looks like this. You can buy it in all the links and all the places. I just want to say thank you so much and congratulations to Krys on the natural mother of a child. And thank you so much, Alex, for being here and being in conversation. Yes, buy Krys's book, buy Alex's book. If you feel moved and love Blue Stoop and love Philly writers and love accessibility, I'm going to put the link to our fundraiser. Again, it's also in all of our social media. We really appreciate your support and hope come back for more conversations like this. So congrats again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.